So it's really my pleasure now to invite Sandy Morrison to give us an international perspective. She's the current president of the International Council of Adult Education and ICAE, and has served as president of Asia South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Education. Now, there's a whole range of other descriptions and bios, and I think you've got that on a list on your seat, so I won't go through everything, but I recently had the pleasure of meeting Sandy when I was in Wellington about a month ago, so I'm really happy that Sandy's here to come to our event and give us a perspective, which is aptly titled Learning from the Chameleon. Thank you, Sandy.
Greetings, colleagues, distinguished guests and participants, and particularly to Elder Ron Jones. Thank you for your welcome to country. As an Indigenous person from Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a member of several tribal confederations, it's really important for me to be acknowledged in such a manner. It's really important for me to acknowledge your ancestors, your mountains, your rivers, and the spirit, the welcoming spirit that have allowed us the privilege of walking on your lands. So I greet you, I greet your ancestors and other Indigenous peoples. And thank you very much for the invite to be able to be here. I arrived here in Melbourne, and I arrived in this space, and then my SBA colleagues walk into the room. And so I just want to greet Mr. Kazi Alam from one of the biggest NGOs in Bangladesh called Dhaka Asanya Mission. He served on the Executive Council when I was President of SBA, and he saw my name somewhere, so I thought he'll turn up and be present and listen to some of the conversations. And of course, my colleague and good friend, Associate Professor Robbie Guevara, who, as well as being the ECI Vice President, Robbie has also stood down as the immediate past president of SBA. And the South Pacific has a rich history of contribution to international perspectives. And I also want to acknowledge Bernie Lovegrove, who, if he's not here, that he will turn up, someone that just keeps the machine going constantly. And those of you who are SBA members and ECI members, it's wonderful to be here as a face for that international discourse and the emerging challenges and learnings that we also have. And when I met with Jenny, I went, wow, you have a national lifelong learning policy and you have a year that's committed to it. She goes, oh no, we just did it. I went, oh, create the rumour and the meaning and the practice and the action will just kick in. So what a wonderful vision, and everything about it has been, I thought, very, very impressive. And thank you, Jenny, thank you, Henrik, for making my stay very comfortable. My association with Allah actually goes back to the Alistair Crombie years and the Dorothy Lucardi years. So I kind of feel that I've been in and out some of these discussions with Allah over many, many years. I think that takes us back to the late 1990s. So I kind of feel that I've got a bit of an association with all of you from Allah, even though I've been in New Zealand and even though I've been a face internationally. And I really loved the concept about the chameleon, the fact that learning changes lives, because obviously we're all committed to that and we all believe in that, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And just when I think about a lifelong learning and I read through the discussion document, we all know some of these things. I mean, these are pretty much givens. That it's required now because there's so many changes. So there's not just one job that we need to be ready for or one future experience, but the preparation for what could be a complex future is what I think that we're all grappling with. And it's important that we just not have local knowledge, but we also have knowledge from elsewhere. And may I also add in that the place of Indigenous knowledge has a very solid contribution, I think, to helping solve some of these dilemmas that we have. And at an international perspective, at least now with some of these global agendas, you can see that Indigenous knowledge is acknowledged. And that's been through continual barking, obviously, of Indigenous peoples to ensure that it is included. And so thinking through lifelong learning today, we have to be ready for and prepared for all these multiple life opportunities. In fact, we need to be ready now just to maintain our position, no matter what position that we hold. And this requires some support from community, a coordinated effort, and let's also remember the digital supports. So from an international perspective, I don't really think I'm telling you anything new. When you work locally and when you work nationally, then all of these issues play out, but just on the larger global level. So in reading through the discussion document, I went, oh, yep, we talked about that. Oh, yep, we talked about that. So I found it a very robust document because we've had so many discussions on the themes and the messages that emerge from that discussion document. And as we saw in the discussion document, that we still grapple with these definitions of lifelong learning, that we, in many other countries, are known as different things. For example, Mr. Kazi Alam here, it would still be literacy. When they talk about lifelong learning or adult education, it is still about literacy, and particularly literacy levels of women and girls. And when we're in some of the other countries in Europe, that it is still adult education. And, you know, the discourse changes depending on which region you're in. Is adult education part of lifelong learning? How come adult education has been subsumed under the lifelong learning agenda, and can we say it synonymously? So we kind of grapple with some of these conceptual definitions as well. And of course the association and offering a counter discourse to some of these neoliberal policies, measurements and work outcomes. And, you know, right when you think that you're making ground and you've got various things in some of these global agendas, then you read the next global report. So I was looking at the Learning to Realise Education's Promise, and another report called the Towards a Reskilling Revolution. And the Towards a Reskilling Revolution talks constantly about lifelong learning in the association with work. And it's all about transition between work outcomes. And we know this stuff, but sometimes I think that we've gone a little bit further, and then we're reminded we really haven't gone too much further. And the Learning to Realise Education's Promise really highlights the measurements and how to assess and the absolute importance of assessing education. And it's really heavy on that. And so I guess our work as adult educators is we're always going to be caught up in encountering this discourse. And of course this, as you all know, we still have a low priority and little resource given for adult learning, and sometimes it always seems that we're on the back foot. Our work in ECI is to ensure still that with Target 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 agenda, how do we give meaning to no one left behind? I noticed in Tony's talk and my talk that we both talk about inequities, and that was also brought up by our elder this morning. What does that mean for us? How do we give meaning to that? Because Target 4 still is about measurement of formal education. And I guess something with the lifelong learning agenda, does that mean that it's up to the individual all the time to be accountable for their learning? Where is that state responsibility still, again, fitting under the political will? And of course, given that formal education is part of the continuum also of lifelong learning, that we need, it's not just about applying critical application to the lifelong learning agenda. Okay, it has to kind of happen throughout the formal education as well, and I notice again that Tony picked up on that. In fact, our abstracts were starting to look a little bit similar, so I thought then that I would turn some attention to this wonderful concept of the chameleon. So what can we learn from the chameleon? Well, I looked up 10 facts that maybe people didn't know, and then I thought on 15 minutes that's too much, so let me just choose a few. So chameleons continuously grow, and so some of the characteristics of lifelong learning is that lifelong learning is about learning events, and learning events that hopefully engage us with deeper realisations and understandings that are achieved through critical reflections, some of them unconscious and some of them conscious. That chameleons have a good grip because of the way that their toes and their feet have been created. And so that reminds me that when you get a good grip, that you can achieve some of the milestones, because lifelong learning is characterised by milestones. The formal education system, of course, seizes that moment to assess or examine that knowledge. And that's our understanding of what we know as individuals, so that others may make assessments. And I notice in the discussion document that it's asking, so how can we make informal learning matter? What is it that we need to do to give validation to those many lifelong learning events and milestones that we achieve? And then the community sanctions of the learning that allow us to engage in healthy citizenship and all of these things that we talk about that adult education and lifelong learning can contribute to. Remembering, of course, that we have a moral, ethical, we can grow our moral, ethical and spiritual disposition, not only for ourselves, but within our communities. And of course, the chameleons, they have eyes that can act independently of each other. So there's many perspectives to look at the one issue or the one problem. And they have a much wider visible range as well. So that reminds me of the holistic approach, multi-perspective, multidisciplinary approaches to the one issues. And of course the change of colour, which isn't so much about the environment, but is about the emotions and feelings. And this is what education gives to us as well. So the values and the context in which adult education operates is what is nature and what is feelings for the chameleon. And so just some thoughts from me, and this is my last slide, knowing that I have been given time, like Tony at the end, to make some final comments, some thoughts from me to enhance the policy framework and the really, really good work that Ella is already doing, is that no single actor in our community will have the answer. The discussion document talks about a whole of government approach, but it's really a whole of system approach. We can't just, in this lifelong agenda, we can't just fix one part of it, and this requires increased coordination between local, state and federal systems. In my context, in Aotearoa New Zealand, we place disadvantage at the centre. We place indigeneity at the centre, but we have a different political context. The treaty which our chief signed with the government and with the Crown has now developed to such an extent that it is an absolute given that there is an alternative knowledge system, and that reducing inequities is all our responsibility, and that a lot of learning needs to happen. So the place of disadvantaged and marginalised people should be firmly at the centre if we are going to create change. And as I said before, in this lifelong learning agenda, many learning participants bring their cultural capital, can contribute through the alternative knowledge systems to finding sustainable community outcomes. And ECI, at a global level, advocates very well for all its members and the many issues that we face, and we have some good examples of shared good practice. And it's important to recognise the smaller learnings along the way, not just the big thing. And as I said earlier, that was about how do we want to credentialise or give that validation, and to be creative and entrepreneurial. I sometimes think that we miss this creative and innovative aspect, and coming out of the formal learning system, this is what we need to encourage to happen as well. Recently, I worked in Kiribati on a climate change agenda over a number of years, and the reason that we were asked to work in Kiribati was with so many young people who had no opportunity to go on to higher education, be that in the secondary school years or be that thereafter. How can they use their entrepreneurial talents to give meaning to their lives? And it was as simple as that. And so to encourage and unlock that potential that we know exists in these communities. And of course, the lifelong learning relationship to wellbeing, because in the end, that's what we all want. And again, this whole of systems approach isn't just about the lifelong journey agenda, but it's about the wellbeing agenda and the contribution to health, to social cohesion, and all of these soft targets that we already know. So these are a few stray thoughts that I'd like to share with you, and I look forward to hearing the commentary from the panels that are going to be speaking later and from the discussions to follow. And you know, Michelangelo at 87, he said, I'm still learning. So with that, ka nui ngā mahi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora.